just like one round, like exhausted, everything, bah, bah, bah. I'm a bit of a talker and talk and talk.
All of a sudden.
I am a talk and talk. I thought we had like two rounds, but it's just one round, so I had like tons of yeah.
Should I wait a minute or?
Good afternoon, colleagues.
Good
Sorry.
afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Um, sorry. We're about to start, so if you all can have your seats, please. And I hope you all can hear me very well. So good afternoon, and also hello to everyone who's joining us online, because I do believe that this event is also being streamed. Thank you so much for joining us for this extremely critical discussion on scaling up solutions to prevent and respond to gender-based violence in the context of the climate crisis. The event is being organized by the Generation Equality Action Coalition on Feminist Action for Climate Justice and the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence, along with the International Development Law Organization, or IDLO, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, or known as IUCN, and Engaja Mundo. I'm Nupur Prakash from IDLO, and I'm the moderator for this discussion this afternoon. As a leader to the FACJ and a commitment maker to the GBV Action Coalition, IDLO considers it urgent and extremely critical to highlight and increase the focus on the interlinkages between GBV and climate change in global policy fora and negotiations such as COP29. As a rule of law organization, IDLO is proud to adopt a survivor-centered approach to addressing GBV in context of crisis, including the climate crisis. We work with justice sector actors in national and local contexts to prevent and respond to GBV. We support the development of laws and policies to ensure that women and girls are protected from violence, and we work on legal empowerment of women and girls to advocate and claim their rights and access justice. From our work, we have firsthand witnessed that GBV is used to control women's access to natural resources. For example, there are so many examples of sextortion related to access to land rights and natural resources. There's also clear evidence on increase in domestic and intimate partner violence in the aftermath of disasters. Addressing gender-based violence in the context of climate change is crucial for protecting women's human rights, but also building resilient communities. And despite these devastating consequences faced by women and girls, especially for those who are the front lines and most marginalized, there are no efforts to devise strategies, or very minimal efforts to devise strategies and implement solutions to GBV in the climate crisis. In fact, in global climate negotiation, this continues to be backtracked on, and funding remains negligible. And so with this event, we bring together a host of practitioners and policymakers who will shed light on this nexus and also share strategies to support women and girls and prevent gender-based violence within the full scope of global climate ambitions. With that, I'd like to invite upon Sylvia Lehel. Sylvia is the Global Thematic Lead for the Generation Equality Action Coalition on Feminist Action for Climate Justice, and she's going to open the event for us. Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you so much, Nupur. I hope you can all hear me well. It is an absolute pleasure to be here and to see this wonderful turnout on this wonderful day. And we could even say that the chair that we left open so that you can see the PowerPoint is for the invisible defenders, is for the invisible woman, and all our fellow colleagues who are fighting now under the UN CCCC framework to not to lose gender ambition. So as Nupur kindly introduced me and this stellar gathering, we are here today because our friends at the Benelux Pavilion invited us on behalf of the UN Women convened Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition that was convened under Generation Equality, a multi-stakeholder effort that hosts 6 thematic coalitions, one of which is focusing on Feminist Action for Climate Justice, and the other one on gender-based violence. So we thought that this overlapping area is an extremely timely discussion for this COP when women's rights are under attack. And so basically these two coalitions, along with the others that deal with sexual and reproductive rights, as well as Women, Peace, Security Nexus, we believe that the Generation Equality family and umbrella and our commitment makers, who are you, basically, civil society, private sector, governments, can really push this agenda that is such a huge crisis of our times. And we will hear from our stellar panel, first starting with my wonderful colleague Jamie from IUCN, on the evidence base that is related to the gender and environment and violence nexus. We know what is happening. Very much is related to, as you were saying, access to natural resources, land rights, sexual health and reproductive rights, and others, forced migration. And we will hear a lot of evidence, and we feel that this evidence needs to make its way to policymaking, needs to make its way to empowering communities. That's why it's incredibly heartwarming to see many of our commitment maker, civil society and women's rights organizations here with us. And I would like to also highlight perhaps that attending such global convenings, gatherings, is not an easy task. You've seen the hurdles, the paywall and others, and UN Women and the Action Coalition is proud to say that we've been trying and striving to support with our Partner Badge program the participation of these, many of them very young activists, to be here, to raise their voices. We see all the protests today for feminist climate justice on the climate finance side, but also on the normative side. So as we think of our fellow negotiators and activists fighting for the Lima Work Program on Gender and other instruments under the Convention, and also on climate finance, we believe that this coalition, the Gender-Based Violence Coalition and Feminist Action for Climate Justice Coalition, along with all of our partners, I could list them, but you see them on the screen, we're here for the same cause. And I'm really, really pleased that we managed to get such a limelight event altogether, and I'm really excited to hear what our civil society organizations are here to say, advocating for solutions, but also bringing us their perspective. And then we can hear how regional and national level policymaking, collaboration, capacity building, peer-to-peer learning can really push this agenda forward. I think we are all pieces of the puzzle. Not one stakeholder is unimportant, so we really need to hear these voices, and I'm excited to hear. And also, I invite you to pose your questions to the panel. We will have two little segments, as we will hear from Nupur. But once again, on behalf of Generation Equality, UN Women, the two action coalitions that are co-organizers, wonderful to be with you, and look forward to this exciting event and fruitful exchange. Thank you so much. Back to Nupur.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you so much for highlighting the importance of the multi-stakeholder nature of the work that we do. We're all pieces of the puzzle, and it's really important that we focus not just on policy or the programming on ground, but we all bring it all together. As Sylvia mentioned, we have a stellar lineup of speakers, experts, and we've divided the session in 3 different segments so that we can really make sure to give enough time to the different parts of the puzzle. And so for our first speaker, for our first segment, we have Jamie Wen-Besson from IUCN. She's the Senior Gender Program Manager and also Chief of Party for the Agent Program, or Advancing Gender in the Environment Program. And Jamie is going to talk us through the interlinkages between GBV and climate, but really hone into how data and negotiations and how they all come together. Jamie, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Nupur, and thank you so much to all the organizers, colleagues, for being here for this really important topic. So as mentioned, my name is Jamie, and I will be privileged to kind of set the scene for us for today's session. So first and foremost, I do want to, of course, caution that this starting presentation does include information, insights, and voices about people who have experienced gender-based violence in relation to environmental and climate linkages. I myself, as a GBV survivor, also want to say that really value self-care, so please take care of yourself. There's also going to be far too much data and examples on the slides. We won't have the time to go through everything point by point. I'll just give the kind of key summary overview. But what I encourage is wherever your eyes and your heart lands on the screen, just to take that piece of information, to take that voice and keep that with you, because otherwise, you know, there's just a lot of information. So I do apologize for the run through. So first and foremost, I've been asked to provide this presentation as IUCN. We actually conducted a 2-year study that we published in 2020 on the intersections across the globe. Quite unfortunately, across environmental and climate sectors, this was something that perhaps in certain areas, you know, the topic was picked up upon, but we never really had a comprehensive approach to understanding, you know, just how pervasive and widespread are these linkages across all of the different, you know, natural resource, climate, mitigation, adaptation sectors in that way. So in the process of doing that 2-year study, we reviewed over 1,000 resources. We heard from key experts. We heard from over 300 participants that you know, participated in surveys. And so I just wanted to share some of the overarching information. From the 300-page report that we generated of that study, essentially there were really 3 primary findings. The first is that gender-based violence, we found, is used to systematically negotiate and reinforce power structures around gender on who has the right to access, to manage, to control, to make decisions about natural resources and about environmental opportunities and livelihoods in relation to climate change, and as well as addressing their negative impacts. We also found that these dynamics are significantly worsened and exacerbated in the sense of where there is environmental degradation or pressures such as climate change or large-scale extractive activities. And the third is that across all walks of life of the environment and conservation and climate sectors, that gender-based violence is a part of these workplaces, whether it's in activism, whether it's in conservation and climate implementation of programs. In every space, these issues pervade and exist, and there is no place that is an exception. So you'll see some data up here that very broadly I'll just mention that of the 300 plus practitioners and policymakers we heard from, these were all environmental policymakers and practitioners, and about 69% of them let us know that they had in fact either seen, directly witnessed, or had disclosed to them in the course of their work gender-based violence and environmental linkages. What's not shown is a further 13% said that they weren't quite sure about the dynamics they were witnessing and what that could be understood as. And nearly 3/4 of all the respondents told us that there's just not enough information, knowledge, and insight on how to understand and address these issues. And the last thing I'll just point out here is that we also decided to disaggregate our data, the responses we received. And you know, we didn't know exactly what we would find, but what we found is that these insights were being shared by women and men practitioners alike. So very briefly, just to really reinforce all of the points that Nupur raised, first and foremost, I think it's really important to discuss and to understand that gender-based violence is really present in the world of environmental livelihoods and environmentally based livelihoods. And so what we see across the board in all places in the world, in all sectors, sexual extortion in exchange for access to rights, access to resources, and decision-making spaces is very prevalent. And not only sexual extortion, but also violence as a barrier. I'll also mention here that in a similar way, gender-based violence is used to silence the people that are at the forefront of really engaging on the solutions that face our environment and our climate. And so quite unfortunately, there's a lot of emerging data and experience that's being shared, and a lot of stories that are being shared about the impact of gender-based violence as a specific barrier for especially defenders to be able to engage and stay present in the space that they lead in. And so you'll see some concerning information and data that safety from violence and gender-based violence in particular is one of the top barriers for a lot of defenders to engage in this space. What we'll also show here is, as I mentioned, the world of environmental work is no exception. and this is all levels of activities. And so one thing that I'll mention is that there is also a lot of discussion about, where these things are taking place. But you'll see actually most of the examples that we do have data on this is actually coming from STEM fields, coming from environmental sciences, coming from a lot of these spaces where actually the high volume and prevalence of violence and sexual harassment, sexual violence is a real barrier to ensuring that women and girls are not only entering into the environmental work sectors in the fields, but they are also able to stay, be supported, and actually advance within those careers. So there's a lot of information and data around the globe about how women are very prevalent in their young ages in these fields and sectors, but they drop off at a certain age group or in a certain level of roles, and so we can't discount the impact that violence has on that as well. Oops. Okay, and here what I wanted to also mention that we're here at the UNFCCC, so it's really important to mention that climate change itself is a threat multiplier. And so there's also a lot of new emerging information and data about with every rise in temperature that's happening across the globe, there's a lot of interesting studies that are able to find a correlative example that link the rise in temperature with rise in issues like intimate partner or domestic violence, and the rise in challenges regarding the collection of firewood, water, the activities that people have to conduct on a day-to-day basis that are predominantly gendered. These are roles that women and girls around the world are conducting and leading in, and yet the result that they face in response to their activities for survival is to be met with more violence. I'll also mention here that there's also growing evidence around the world that even though in the last decades there was a lot of progress made on child marriage globally, in recent years with the climate change threat really growing, unfortunately in a lot of these spaces there's a lot of regression in those figures. So there are many countries where especially issues like drought and also flooding has really contributed to a correlative rise in child early and forced marriages. And what I'll also share here is that it's really important that a lot of times when we're talking about climate change, environmental programming, there's not necessarily the acceptance that this is actually within the quote-unquote scope of what we do, working on emissions, working on targets of this nature. But it's really important that when we're working in across the globe, no matter the context, and we're talking about power dynamics over rights, resources, decision-making, if we're not also paying attention to the gender dynamics, there's actually lots of evidence where initiatives with their best intentions can unintentionally lead to increased harm because the safety and the mitigation and prevention efforts aren't in place. So there's a lot of a gap there. So I'll mention real quick that, as a result of the study at IUCN, what we then decided to do is we're starting to build this evidence and knowledge base, and what we want to move to is an action-oriented approach. So starting a number of years ago, we started the RISE Grants Challenge, Resilient, Inclusive, and Sustainable Environments, and it's really a system that, we want to provide not only the financing, but also the tailored technical support to have local organizations and women's groups and indigenous peoples organizations collaborate with environmental institutions and also gender-based violence experts to start to integrate the practices and adapt what the gender-based violence global best practices has developed over the years so that the conservation climate community can also learn how to integrate these approaches as well. So the one thing I just wanted to share here is that it's really interesting to see how the rise in demand has been growing as the climate crisis has also been deepening. Even though, we had a small dip in the number of requests this year, 741, that was actually for 18 countries of eligibility, whereas last year we had over 100 countries of eligibility and 814 applications. So just to say that year by year, there is a growing demand that we're just unable to fill as an organization to meet these challenges. And really briefly, what I wanted to share is the reason that we're working on this is to really develop the know-how and the approach to see how we can integrate perspectives about safety. Do people perceive that they are safe from gender-based violence to be able to make those decisions, to engage in exercising and obtaining and advancing their rights in the environmental sectors? And so far, we've managed to work in a number of countries across a lot of different topics, and they've ranged from issues that Indigenous women defenders face with their land rights to things like forestry, to things like sex for fish practices that have been taking place in some fisheries, as well as REDD+ and other initiatives. And all I wanted to say about the experience we've been having so far is that when you put dedicated finance, dedicated support to these topics, there's not the whole world of issues that we can change, but there's a lot that we can learn, a lot that we can adapt, and there's a lot we can do. For a lot of organization, it feels very daunting and very overwhelming to tackle this problem, but I think the point here is taking steps bit by bit, forward by forward, adapting that learning is the way to go, because it is better than just saying that the challenge is too much and leaving the challenges where they are. And so I'll also start to close up by saying that, you of course can access our study from 2020. We also thought 300 pages was a lot to read, so there's an 18-page summary for you. And I just also wanted to share that some other coalition leaders involved in FACJ and GBV Action Coalitions, the UK just published a report last week as well. Hopefully you were able to make that event. And so they also just published a report on climate change and gender-based violence. So there's lots of resources that you can start to tap into the topic. And I also wanted to just say that the most important thing that we found is that, gender-based violence is so pervasive across all environmental sectors and fields. If we are to take a whole of society, a whole of community approach to solving our environmental crises, there's no way that we can do that without women and girls, without all people. And so their voices, their agency, their rights, their safety, and their dignity to exercise those rights has to be prioritized. And until we make that a priority, it is kind of backwards to say that we need to be doing more on inclusion, more on empowerment, more on leadership, while ignoring the fact that it's simply not always safe for them to do so. And so here I'll just start to close by saying that what we've been really learning and assessing over at IUCN is that the world of women is not about either or. Our lives is about a spectrum of equality and inequality and the various factors that shape the world of women for most women around the world and for girls. And so what we also want to start to move to is moving towards a model where we talk about gender equality and women's empowerment as a holistic approach and not solely something that we are only dealing with one area but not the other. We need to start moving forward, addressing all areas of women's inequality and equality issues. And with that, I want to thank you and to thank our organizers.
Thank you, Jamie. That was fantastic. I'm sure everybody in the audience has a lot of questions for you, but I would request you to hold on to them because we will have a Q&A segment. Before I move on to our next segment, I just wanted to say that, Jamie, the highlight that you made around the whole of society approach and the fact that we cannot take that approach without actually addressing gender dynamics and gender-based violence, it's so important. And the fact that even today, when we look around at COP29 and the fact that we don't look at GBV as something within the scope of the work that we're doing, it's incredible because it is so intertwined with any mitigation and adaptation work that we're planning to do. So thank you so much for highlighting that. Our next segment focuses on listening to insights from our partners from civil society to hear about their work and to learn more about their challenges as well as the opportunities that they see in this area of work. And so to begin that segment, our first speaker is Husna Khan. Husna is the program manager at Wild Heart Kenya. Husna, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for taking your time and coming here today. As introduced, my name is Husna Khan from Wild Heart Kenya. I'm happy to be here on this platform today to come and share my experiences, our work, and what we have been doing in Kenya. So allow me to say that my journey started from the streets, where we used to do community engagement, creating awareness on gender-based violence, because where I come from, gender-based violence rates are very, very high. There's so many data, as Eleanor, you've also explained. In my country, there are data from the National Criminal Research Center indicating that there are 47% of gender-based violence cases from places where they have been affected by climate change. Again, there is another data from Kenya Red Cross showing there is a 78% increment of gender-based violence from areas where they are drought-prone. So in my community, there is a drought, there is flooding, but the most critical thing is the drought. Women from my community have to travel miles and miles to look for water. Girls are being exposed to gender-based violence, sexual violence, economic oppression. Along these ways, we have people, we call them mashifta, but these are bandits. They're on the way to attack women. Anything that moves, these people will actually attack. From our perspective as Wild Heart Kenya, we have tried to come up with programs that empower women economically through ensuring there is access to water for boreholes. But again, they're not very sustainable because of the drought. Again, even these boreholes that we try to ensure our women do not have to go miles and miles to go look for water, they usually end up drying. We do have structures in the region. From my capacity, I'm also a journalist and a communications person. We try to come up with a communication strategy where women come together, women, young girls, youth, and men, and people with disability, to come up and say that from us as a ward in Voi, where I come from the community, this is what we are proposing. Even though the government wants to make a road, but we want boreholes. Even though the government wants to do things, this is what we want. So this has actually helped women have their voices heard, even at the village level, where they sit down with the local structure. Okay. From the local structures from Wazee, Nyumba Kumi. These are the local structures in my community. And this is something that has worked. And we are also hoping to push it forward to the national level, that based on the actual policies that are there and the frameworks that are there, these are things that can be implemented and can work everywhere. Among things that have worked is the connections we have with these amazing organizations where we empower our women with knowledge. Because again, some of them go through these things, but they don't know that they are wrong. They don't know. Because with the droughts, you will see that the husband suggests that, oh, we can marry her off to reduce the burden or reduce the amount of mouths to feed. But again, through such empowerment and knowledge sharing, they do get to know this is wrong. This is a young person. Even though wherever you're taking, you have the mentality that she's going to be in good hands, but she's a young girl. She deserves to study. She deserves to go to school. Coming to the challenges, again, I can say frameworks are there, but implementation from the government or the leaders is very low. We do have policies or frameworks such as national climate change funds, but again, they're not being implemented. They're not being implemented at all. It is through these structures that are there and the collaboration between government, they can flow from the national government or globally to the village level. But again, if there is no implementation, then how are we going to continue to do the work and move forward? Another thing I would love to share is in my community, we've tried so hard to ensure that women legally have access to lands written in their names, because are some of the programs that we've tried to like engage women in coming up with economically projects to empower them. But again, they would say, this land is not in my name. Anytime I can be chased here from my in-laws, from my husband, or from anyone in the community. So again, this is also a barrier to women moving forward and empowering themselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Husna. I think from my experience, the three key takeaways that you highlighted was so important. Was one, a safe space for women to be able to communicate and voice in decision-making avenues, even at the local levels. Secondly, the importance of securing women's land rights and land titles, extremely important. And also, having good laws and policies is not enough. We need to be able to enforce them. And so to work on enforcement is a really critical area. So thank you for highlighting that. Our next speaker is Eleanor Blomstrom. She is the Senior Manager for Policy and Advocacy at Women Deliver. Eleanor, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I really appreciate being invited. Women Deliver is an advocacy organization that works at the global level for the most part, and we work for the right to bodily autonomy for all women and girls and gender diverse people, but especially adolescent girls. And we see the climate crisis really as a health and a rights crisis, and that's how we work to address the impacts that we see. Women Deliver is also a co-convener of the SRHR and Climate Justice Coalition. SRHR, in case you're not aware, is Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. And that coalition is actually an outcome of the Feminist Action for Climate Justice commitment-making process. So the work and the coalition are really a central piece of the FACJ. So it's really good to be here. The coalition itself has over 100 members from different countries, and we work across policy areas, but really focus a lot on the UNFCCC to address SRHR and climate issues from a rights-based perspective and a climate justice perspective. We work in coordinated advocacy. And the co-conveners, just to shout out, I see Arrow here, also IPAS, and We Do as well. And one of the things the coalition does is generate evidence that can be used in that collective advocacy. And so part of that is on the various ways that the climate crisis is worsening access to fulfillment of, exercise of sexual and reproductive health and rights. And I don't want to go into too many details. Jamie gave such a great overview of what is out there. What I wanted to say about SRHR is you may wonder why I'm saying that and not gender-based violence. It's because gender-based violence is a component of this comprehensive sense of sexual and reproductive health and rights. And we really address it from within that comprehensive view to ensure that we're not having the siloing of issues. So for us, SRHR also includes comprehensive sexuality education, which actually helps to reduce gender-based violence, antenatal childbirth and postnatal care, safe abortion services, sexual health and well-being, so much more. And I just wanted to situate what I'm saying in that context. We have a few different documents that we use to support our collective advocacy that addresses the climate crisis and SRHR and sexual and gender-based violence. I can share later the coalition website. There's a messaging guide to help advocates speak to delegates. There's a guide that talks about how to integrate SRHR into the nationally determined contributions. And on Wednesday, we're going to be launching a new brief targeted towards the health community to help them in their advocacy. But I also wanted to just be really clear that, preventing and addressing sexual and gender-based violence really is fundamental to achieving SRHR and the bodily autonomy of women and girls and gender diverse people, and we have to keep that in mind. One quick share I wanted to make to add to the research is that last year we did some research with Pop Council that was led by youth and with focus group discussions with young people who came to many of the same conclusions, in that gender-based violence increases in the climate crisis, violence-based fetching water, the child early and forced marriages and unions that are increasing because of the economic impacts. And one thing we noted was that it's really just a negative coping mechanism that sometimes the young women are choosing themselves, but it's not a choice. We can't really call that a choice that they're making. They're forced into it to escape the challenges they're seeing. But what are we doing for advocacy? So at the UNFCCC, we come and we follow the negotiating streams. For example, the gender stream, which has the Lima Work Program, and they're negotiating a renewal of it. Right now, there is one short paragraph about gender-based violence in it. We hope it stays, but they are very tense negotiations. So this week will show us how that turns out, but that's what we keep advocating for. There will also be a gender action plan with much more practical work, and we expect that ways to address SRHR, health, and gender-based violence will come into that. We know we need to have more money. We're advocating for not just climate finance to go to SRHR, but to increase the size of the pie. Also to make sure that parties know how to access the existing financial mechanisms and to put forward projects that address SRHR and gender-based violence. We need to make linkages to the care workers and the community health workers who are human rights defenders providing these services in the climate crisis and risking their own lives. It's really an uphill battle. People say, what is the evidence? I don't know how this could possibly be related. And so I think that's something that as a community here we can work on collectively to really improve how we communicate the evidence and make it available. And feminists know that we have to get to the root causes of gender-based violence, and that's where we start. We have to address patriarchy, masculinity, power structures, colonialism, capitalism, extractivism, all the same drivers of the climate crisis. It's absolutely critical. And then in terms of coherence, we also work as Women Deliver in other spaces at the General Assembly or CSW. And it's the same question, like, why does it matter? How do we make this link? Should we even talk about it here? Because we have the UNFCCC. So my final point is really just that we need to sit in collective action in our feminist spaces and drive this forward, make sure we're understanding what the evidence is, but also centering those survivors of sexual and gender-based violence in all the work that we do.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. I think you made some really pertinent points, especially around the health issue and the SRHR issue and how the drivers are all interlinked, whether it's SGBV, SRHR, and how advocacy and awareness on this issue, as well as financing, is critical. So thank you for that. Our next speaker is Ms. Carol Santos. Carol is the National Coordinator for Engajamundo, a Brazilian youth civil society organization. Carol, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nupur. Well, I'd also like to thank Sylvia for this opportunity. I'm Carolina, but I prefer Carol. I'm from Engajamundo. That's a Brazilian youth-led organization. We focus primarily on talking about climate justice by a youth perspective. And gender plays a crucial role in this. When I talk about these intersections like gender and race and ethnicity, I am talking about how these things affect my body. When I talk about gender and climate, I'm talking about how it affects my body. And to me, personally, and I believe for a lot of women here, talking about from our body's perspective is really important because our body puts us in various situations, in a lot of situations, our body puts us in a state of constant alert for our safety and sometimes for our lives. So for us, it's really important to talk from the perspective of our own bodies. Growing up being a young woman in a world that constantly disregards my rights in related to my body autonomy, related to my human rights, constantly disregards my role in society and my right to live in a world the same way a man would, the same way a white man would. It's really, really difficult. And we learn that from being non-white girls, being non-white women, we learn that from a very young age. And seeing as violence is used as a weapon against women's body throughout history and in different places in the world is very frightening. Seeing as it is used, especially when it comes to sexual violence, it is used as a weapon against our body, so it's really frightening. And I live in one of the most dangerous countries to live if you're an environmentalist, if you're a defender. Brazil is the second most dangerous country to live in if you're a defender, second only to Colombia. The Amazonian region, that's the region where I am from, leads the ranking of murdering of defenders. So it is a very difficult situation to live in. Knowing that we need to defend our rights, we need to defend our territory, our forests, but still living with fear that something may happen to us all the time. In my territory, indigenous, Quilombola are traditional communities, black traditional communities, communities that exist since the period of slavery in Brazil, and they resist to this day. So indigenous, Quilombola, rural communities in Brazil are led by women, naturally led by women, massively led by women, which is a great thing. It is amazing that women are seen as the natural leaders of these communities. But it also puts them in a very harmful situation. I've seen a lot of women, leading women in my community, my region, and my country overall die over the years. And to me, it's just something that I really try to now let this weekend my will to fight for what I think is right and to fight for my territory and for my people. But sometimes it's really difficult to not let it weaken your will to really do those things. So we understand that we still need resources to fight this suppression. We still need resources to fight these injustices that we still now have. We still don't have access to these resources, and it is particularly harmful when this violence comes from the official government, the official structures that should be there to protect you. Sometimes these ways of power, the patriarchy, all those things that are built especially to let us know that we do not belong in places like this. We do not belong in places of power. They come from the structures, the very structures that should be there to protect you. So that's another challenge, I would say. We understand that we still need access to resources and to fight these injustices and defend ourselves from this sort of violence. So this is one of the reasons why we advocate so much for the ratification of the Escazú Agreement. That is a treaty that talks about civil rights, human rights, rights to access to information, rights to access of participation, and the protection of activists in Latin America that we find really important to exist and to be implemented in our territory. For all of these reasons I just told you, and for hundreds of others more. I personally still feel that we have a long way to go regarding women's rights and humans' rights, especially in the countries of the global south. But especially with the rising of political agendas that barely recognize our rights to live and our rights to be barely recognize us as human beings. So, but I think we still need to push forward. That is the reason why we should keep pushing forward, and being in spaces like this is a start, and it's the right way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. I think all of us can sort of feel how exhausted this whole fight can be, that, the constant sort of battling between I need to do this and the will to kind of, continue going, but in the face of this constant violence, especially being a woman of color. And I think you highlighted something very important around the growing number of femicides, the growing number of violence against women rights defenders, human rights defenders. We're seeing this all across, whether it's Latin America, Asia, there are huge numbers, and that is definitely very concerning. So thank you so much for highlighting that. And now I move on to the last speaker of our segment, Dr. Zunzevi Bor Bondgulo Bondie. I really hope I said that correctly. Dr. Zunzevi Bor is the Director for Women for a Change in Cameroon. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Good day, everyone. Hello. Okay, yeah. Good day, everyone. Good day. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Yes, so I must say thank you for the work you're doing. It's really very touching. So for me, I come from, a part of the world where we have, it's interesting for those who know our history. And speaking to you today, I will just limit myself to two issues. One around the movement that we co-convene, which is Jeune Égalité et Caste. And the story about Jeune Égalité et Caste is one which was born as a result of generation equality. And it's one of the first movements that was born from generation equality. And the whole idea was, how do we, as women's rights activists, as feminists, as eco-feminists, come together to actually follow the conversation around generation equality and also increase commitment making and engagement both at the policy level and at the programmatic level. So as a result of that, I just want to let you know that Cameroon is part of the center sub-region. So in Africa, so the central sub-region is made up of 11 countries. So we're talking about Equatorial Guinea, Chad, South Tome, Gabon, Cameroon, DRC, Congo, Brazzaville, Rwanda, Burundi, and I think, which one again? I've forgotten. Angola. So maybe just a quick, how many persons are from South Tome in this meeting? Just a raise of hand. How many persons are from Gabon? How many persons are from Equatorial Guinea? Well, I asked that deliberately because if you attend meetings often, just look around. How many persons come from these countries? Often we are hardly ever present in these spaces. One of the reasons sometimes is linguistic, because this sub-region is made up of countries that speak Portuguese, Spanish, French, Arabic. So French is, spoken by like 80%, followed by Portuguese, it will surprise you, and Spanish, Arab, and English. That's why I'm able to speak English. So language is one of the barriers. And as you all know, some of the UN documents also does not capture most of these languages. Translation is always the issue. So most of the times we hardly get in these spaces. For us from Cameroon, because we speak English and French, we are privileged to access this information. But people from these countries are often not privileged. So it's as a result of that we came up Jeune Égalité, because we're like, you know what? We will no longer stay behind. This is all about the generation, the now and the future, and we need to engage in the process. And Generation Equality is a commitment maker to the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence, as well as Feminist Action Coalition on Climate Justice and Feminist Leadership. So the idea was, how do we increase commitment first? How do we ensure that the information, we have access to this information and translate it in a language that we better communicate? And how do we also engage with our different government officials, both in the global space as well as at the national level? And from 2019, when the Action Coalition was launched, we were just 3 commitment makers, 0 Action Coalition leader. But as a result of that, we increased over the years to over 300 commitment makers from these sub-regions who are also actively engaged and following up the conversation. And through that, we also train, build capacities of members. We are over 200, build capacities of members to be able to understand the process and engage at their national level. Where at this moment, we have members who've been able to engage in discussions at the national level. For instance, in Cameroon, they are about to pass the law on violence against women. So members are able to engage in that discussion and also contribute in the development of that law. Within the Central African sub-region, at the moment, there is conversation around the carbon market. As you all know, we belong to that Congo basin, which is now like the new discovery of the world, where there's all this carbon market conversation. And we are like, hey, we have to follow this conversation. we're talking about carbon market. Is this another form of land grabbing, or is it another form of overburden on us? How do we bring in that feminist perspective? How do we bring in that lived realities? Because we have learned the hard way as women. We have learned the hard way as farmers. We are the ones that are close to the environment. We are the ones that witness firsthand the devastating impact of climate change. So it's important that while we are looking at this new form of doing business through carbon credits, it's also important to look at it critically. How is that, affecting women and girls? How is that affecting the local farmer? First of all, land, I think in the research which you said, land is a very precious treasure, but then do we have ownership and control over these pieces of land? So those are the conversations we engage with our members. We hold meetings to just discuss about what are we hearing, what is happening, and how do we engage. However, we have challenges also. Some of the challenges is, one, for sure, this information sometimes happen without some of us even knowing. We just see it on the news like, when did this meeting take place? So those are some of the challenges. Access to the information again. And secondly, human resource, having that capacity to be able to engage in an efficient way. And also, the bigger one, which is around the finance, because sometimes you need finance for mobility. So that is it at the macro level. Now at the community level, how we do respond to issues that cut across, gender-based violence and climate change. For instance, our members, we always have this dialogue where we encourage and kind of share some hotspot information. Like, we know communities that are always flood, I'm told I should wrap up. Anyway, so one example, which is a good practice, where we engage through our members with communities that are affected by flood. Some of the communities, why people live there is because it's cheap, land there is cheap, and rent is cheap. So we notice that we cannot really, in terms of displacement, we cannot assist with displacement support. So we kind of create small host communities where, when there are cases of flood, sisters and families could displace temporarily to live with some of these host communities while return. Reason being that in the past, most of the times when incidents like this happen, you have people who offer you help, but then in the end, it leads up to being exposed to risks and violence in guise of providing you help, given the fact that you're already vulnerable, and they exploit that vulnerability. So those are some little actions that we do at the community level to, provide support and also see how we address incidents of GBV. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zanzibo. I think those were some incredible lessons that you shared with us. Also, 300 commitment makers since 2019. That's incredible. So I think, congratulations for the work that you're doing. But thank you also so much for sharing with us these really important examples. And sorry for cutting you in between. We're running out of time. And so I have about 5 minutes for a Q&A after this segment before we move on to the next segment. So maybe we can take a couple of questions from the floor. I see a lady over there. Maybe we can take a couple of questions. Is there anyone else? Okay, so we can.
So thank you. My name is Dr. Jessica Hernandez, and I'm a climate and land tenure specialist at Landesa. So one of the things that we're actually interested in doing, especially with our women-led collectives and coalitions, is to start the repair process, right? We all have the data that gender-based violence is really high in local and indigenous communities. So my question for the panel is, what are some of the repair processes your organization or community actually has implemented to start the healing that it's needed for our women, especially when it comes to gender-based violence? Thank you.
I keep it?
Thank you so much. My name is Margaret. I thank the lady who has just spoken about the hosting communities that host the internally displaced people as well as the refugees, and some of the more challenges that we face in the refugee areas, all the areas that host the people that have been displaced due to climate challenges, is that even when women face GBV, the reporting systems are really hard. There is a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of steps that they have to go through to report, and even since they have been hosting the areas, it's very hard to be listened to. Also, the areas where they settle in, you find that there is less loss and damage that have been really catered for. Like I've said, even the organizations that cater for, like, those who are the survivors of GBV, like, you find that these people also face other challenges. For example, in times of menstruation, there is no water, you have been hosted, and even in the times of getting hosted, they tell you to get married to someone so that you get hosted. And even after getting hosted, that you're married, you have no rights over your body. You have to produce more and more, because in the African setting, we believe that the more children you produce, the more powerful the family is. So I request that there should be the policies that have to be set and be pushed to the government, especially in my country, so that these people are really helped and they report and really they are saved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. I think for now we'll just take two, and then maybe in the next round we'll take more. So for the first question on the repair process, would anyone of the panelists like to address the first question? Can I ask? Carol, would you like to go ahead?
Okay, now it's on. All right. So, as I said before, we are an organization based in Brazil. I think one of the ways that we actually do this sort of repair the best that we can is to include and give a platform so that indigenous women can be a part of. We have 2 indigenous women in our delegation here this year. We make sure that every year since 2015, indigenous communities are included in our delegation to COPs, and not only included, but for effective participation, including indigenous peoples, indigenous women in important agendas, not giving them voice, because they already have their voice, but being a platform that allows them to actually speak and speak for their communities, speak for their people, and speak for themselves, for what they believe in, and what they think should be done regarding the policies, the policy making, and overall changes that we believe should be a reality. So I think that's one way that we can contribute to this repairment.
Thank you, Carol. Eleanor, would you like to?
Yeah, just quickly to say that for the thinking about the coalition and that question about repair, and that's a good question as we're trying to develop more of the co-learning within the coalition and understanding what skills each of the organizations bring. So we'll take that question back and hopefully have a better answer for you, Jessica, next time.
Okay, Jamie, go ahead.
I just wanted to also add to that I think a lot of that is really in how we invest in leadership, right? So I just wanted to call out that one of the grants implementers under RISE is actually Indigenous Peoples Organization members, and so that whole project was really built around Asian Indigenous women defenders and the need for us as a global community to listen directly to them instead of the experts that are always speaking on their behalves, actually to listen to them, have them be the advocates in producing their own global alerts, reporting systems, to CDOC commissions and et cetera, to highlight their experiences through their own lives and their own selves. And so I think us leveraging all of our networks, our relationships, our platforms to support, groups like these to have self-determined ways to bring forward their cases and also to lead that area. So a part of that has also been to invest that while we want the women to be these leaders and advocates, but also to invest in safety plans so that as they're doing so, that they are actually safe to do so. They can come to global convenings like this and rest assured that they can get home and they can have support, and there are safety plans in place to support them to do that.
I really wanted to add something, or to you didn't put it as a question, but I feel like I can add something. You've mentioned something very critical in matters to do with children marriage. Globally, or in my country, like everyone knows, it is illegal to marry off someone who's below the age of 18. In our country, the law, chapter 141, it's illegal to marry off someone who's below the age of 18. So what you can do as well for your country, get to work closer with civil society, with NGOs, to find ways in which you could prevent further. Another way you could prevent this from happening, I don't know if in your country you have structures such as include the religion structure system. They can be among the first people to prevent those cases from happening, because they're closer to you, to your houses. We have so many churches, so many mosques, and so many religious institutions. I feel those can be the first steps in preventing further child marriages. Thank you.
Thank you, Husna. And could I have a loud round of applause for our speakers here before we move on to the next segment? Can I invite the speakers from the next segment to come up on stage, please? I really enjoyed your... Yeah. Great, thank you. And now we have our last segment of the event. And it's really interesting because the last segment really ties in the discussions that we've been having so far, and really focuses on how do we take the data and the knowledge that we have on GBV and gender and bring it and integrate it in national policies and global climate policies. And again, we have speakers that are able to share from their national and regional experiences here. I hope you can all hear me. Is it okay? Yeah, okay. So the first speaker that we have on this panel is Andrea Fion. She's the Climate Change Director from the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources from Guatemala. She's speaking on behalf of her colleague Marlene Oliva, who was not able to be here because I believe she's under the weather. Oh, you're there. Hi. So Marlene, you have the floor.
Hello? You can hear me? Well, thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. As you said, my name is Andrea Fion. I'm the Climate Change Director of Guatemala. I would like to thank you all for your time and conviction to the gender, and especially to gender-related solutions. Thank you so much for inviting Guatemala, and especially my colleague, Marlene Oliva, to speak here. I'm very honored to support her and share with you her message due to her dealing with health issues. But Marlene is here with us. Hi. So when you have questions, you go with her. And well, we want to do a special thanks to the IUCN and USAID for their leadership and support to Guatemala, and to start addressing the linkages between gender-based violence and climate change. For Guatemala, addressing gender-based violence and climate change is vital. Millions of women globally are experiencing gender-based violence in their lives, in the access to the control of nature resources, as a result of climate and in climate activism. Guatemala has a high rate of feminicide, and we're already seeing how the impacts of climate change in our local communities are affecting food security and livelihoods, and increasing forced migration and gender-based violence. When we were developing our Climate Change Gender Action Plan, with the support of the IUCN and USAID, we had a very participatory consultation process and validation process with diverse women and men, including many indigenous women and women from local communities across Guatemala. And then And they explained how domestic violence and sexual violence were increasing due to climate change impacts and that it was a barrier for their full participation in climate action. So, together with the women, we identified concrete actions that responded to their needs and priorities and included concrete actions to address gender-based violence in the energy and forestry sectors. At the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, Marlene is also trying to raise awareness on these issues. And recently, she gave a workshop on gender-based violence for Indigenous peoples for Indigenous peoples organizations and their partners working to address gender-based violence. And other barriers to women participation in sustainable agriculture to adapt to climate change. The IUCN manual on gender-based violence and fisheries was very useful for that. Now she's also seeking for solutions to address gender-based violence in the water sector. From the Climate Change Directorate, we're very committed to support Marlene and her team in the lead of all of these efforts and work as a team to produce results and positive impact. Much more is needed. These issues are often invisible and there's not enough funding. Donor agencies and development organizations need to prioritize investment for the implementation of national gender and climate change action policies and plans to prioritize actions to address gender-based violence within these plans. Guatemala remains very committed to addressing gender-based violence and environmental linkages, despite the challenges we have ahead. Guatemala and the other ILAC countries have been organizing for over 2 years to work towards a more ambitious gender action plan in the convention. And we included the need to address the gender-based violence and sexual harassment in the proposed gap that ILAC submitted to the final review of the Enhanced Lima Work Program on Gender and its gap. I want to thank USAN, the Cascade Institute, UNDP, UN Women, and other UN agencies that have been supporting us through all this process. As you may know, this week we're not able to find common ground on the negotiations. We're continuing this week. I want to end this by saying that we cannot give up or accept any rollback on gender equality and human rights. Women have the right to live free from gender-based violence. We need to continue strengthening the gender responsiveness for climate change frameworks and implementation, including to address gender-based violence, and we all need to join us in this wave. For all the millions of women around the world that are at the front line of the climate change impacts and gender-based violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fionn, and thank you for highlighting the importance of integrating actions on GBV in national climate change plans, but also the importance of having champions in government institutions that take forward those initiatives and bring awareness among government stakeholders. Thank you for being here. Our next speaker is Sarah Nasrawi, the youth representative and climate activist from the Netherlands. Sarah, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Sarah. I am one of the UN youth representatives within the Dutch negotiation delegation. Can you hear me? Yeah? All good? Closer? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So maybe to give a little bit of context, 2 years ago I participated in a feminist climate justice academy, which is a project in the Netherlands where young people are educated on the nexus between gender and climate change. And this is kind of a moment in time where things switched for me. This is something I was not aware of. And I think this is something that is happening a lot in the Netherlands. We need a huge increase in awareness on these issues and the intersectionality of these issues. And what I've really loved seeing is that the last 2 years since I joined the Feminist Climate Academy, it has tripled. So there's so many more young people who are actually getting involved in these discussions. And right before I went to COP, I spoke with them to get their inputs to advocate on behalf of those here at the COP. Because that is what I do as a youth representative. I consult youth in my own country and try to bring those voices to these spaces. And especially when it comes to the NCQG, but also loss and damage, they really stress the importance of access when it comes to finance, also the recognition of non-economic losses and damages. And two of the main things they said is that whatever we do, whether it's mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, it should be locally led, especially for the sake of women and girls in all their diversity. But another thing they said was that it's even more important that whoever gets to speak on these issues are the people who are actually affected by these issues. And that's why it feels a bit strange to be on this panel as well, as an incredibly privileged young woman from the Netherlands. And so at this COP, I spoke to women from young women from Uganda who are here as well today from the She Leads program from Plan International, and they have taught me a lot. And I think in the sake of practice what you preach, I don't think it should be me telling you guys about their stories, but instead I would actually like to hand the microphone to my new friends who have taught me specifically, just as an introduction, how we should not only look at how women and girls are affected differently, but also how in different types of climate change impacts women and girls are affected differently. So they really taught me how whether drought is a huge issue or whether floods are a huge issue, they can really lead to completely different problems relating to gender-based violence. And with that, I would like to give my microphone to you.
Thank you so much. Emma from Bala Emma. Thank you so much. My name is Bala Emma from Uganda under the She Leads project. And I would actually like to speak to this topic in regards to the area that I come from in Uganda, and that's Karamoja region. This is an area that faces a lot of drought, prolonged droughts most times. And we are seeing that women and girls, we know that we are the ones that do the chores at home, the domestic chores, and girls are walking long distances to get water. You're seeing a 7-year-old carrying a 20-liter jerrycan on their head, walking for kilometers to go and get water. I don't know if any of you have experienced that, but a 20-liter jerrycan of water is really heavy for a 7-year-old, a 10-year-old, and they're walking these long distances under scorching heat. Most of them don't have shoes. They're walking these long distances to get water. And along the way, they are facing more challenges because we know that there are a number of men that are stationed in different places because they want to take advantage of this. You're a young girl walking alone. They're obviously going to try and take advantage of that. So many of the girls have actually experienced sexual gender-based violence. Like they've been raped, and as a result of this, we are seeing a number of girls. One, the reporting is really hard for them because they don't know the referral pathways most of the time. We, as the She Leads, have tried so much to show them and advocate for what the referral pathway is. And we know that we, as She Leads, have not reached a very big number. We have reached, yes, some people, but then there are some areas that we have not reached because of financial constraints. And we're seeing that many of these girls don't know where to report. So many of them end up with unwanted pregnancies. And the fact that abortion is illegal in my country, you're seeing people going to quack doctors. You're seeing people using very rudimentary methods for doing these abortions because they don't want to have the kids. So you're seeing them using things like hangers. You use a hanger and try to get the baby out, and that puts you in a lot of trauma. Because I've spoken to a number of these girls, and they're telling you how their experience was, and it's really painful. And on top of it, as a woman, you go out looking for water, come back in the evening, you're supposed to cook, and the man is telling you, maybe you've come back and you've really failed to get the water, and they're asking you, where's the water, where's the food, and they're beating you up. Because in my tradition, the men don't do any other work but caring for cattle, and to them it seems unfair for them to actually do the work of looking for food, because their job is just to do the cattle only. So if you come back and you haven't done your part, you get the beating of your life. And most of these women just have to sit there and take these beatings every day and not report it anywhere. And they're living in misery when a woman comes to, because the organization that I work with that implements She Leads in my district, that is Moroto, you hear, we used to have a gender GBV prevention and project, though it has ended, but it used to help a lot of women. So you're listening to women telling you their side of the story, and it's really, really sad. They are telling you how they were beaten over a cup of water. And remember, you are bringing water to the home or bringing the food, but you still don't have the right to determine who is supposed to eat it. There's like a criteria. The man is supposed to eat first, and then what is left is what you'll sit down to share with a really large number of children. Because remember, in Africa, it's especially in my region, it's you're supposed to have like a number of kids. You know, you. So let's say you have like 9-10 kids, because these people don't even have information about family planning. Yes, so there's a large number of people doing this. So it's really miserable. Thank you. I think I can give my colleague.
Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you for highlighting that really the lived reality and the constant like dehumanization that women face in the context of, you know, accessing basic food and water in Uganda. It's really eye-opening, and thank you for that. I'll move on to our next speaker, Janine Mitchell. She's the Senior Transboundary Stakeholder Advisor at USAID, or the U.S. Agency for International Development. Janine, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's really one moment. That's a bit better. It's really such an honor and a privilege to be on this panel with esteemed colleagues and to have the chance to talk with you today. So thank you very much for the invitation. So I am indeed the Senior Transboundary Stakeholder Engagement Advisor for the USAID South Caucasus Regional Water Management Program. So I work here in the region. And what I would like to talk about today is strategies for promoting women's leadership in climate action and water diplomacy, and how promoting women's leadership can contribute to transforming gender norms in communities, particularly communities that are perhaps suffering from fragility or a post-conflict context, and how that indeed can help produce GBV. So promoting women's leadership is really about giving women the skills to advocate for leadership positions when it comes to water management, when it comes to climate change, because we know water and climate change are really inexorably intertwined with each other. And if we can create networks that bring solidarity for women to get into leadership positions, for women to elevate each other into leadership positions, elevate voices, and be an example to others, to start to normalize women's presence in decision-making capacities, then we can start to do something. And so the example that I would like to share with you today is the Women in Water Diplomacy Network. And so this is a global community of practice, and it is comprised of both formal and informal women decision makers and experts that are advocating for women's meaningful engagement in transboundary water management, but also water management at the national and at the local level. And this network has a wealth of collective experience in water management and decision making and community engagement. And the network is active in some of the most water insecure and conflict sensitive basins around the world. And again, like I said, these are basins that are obviously affected by climate change, and water diplomacy, I would argue, is a form of climate action. The Women in Water Diplomacy Network at the global level was really a very organic, it evolved very organically. It grew out of a need and a request that had been elevated through dialogue with women water diplomats in conflict-sensitive basins to elevate these intersecting challenges around women, water, peace, and security. And the first network at the regional level originated in the Nile Basin, and this was back in 2017. And now we have this global community of women water leaders, and I should say male champions, that are supporting gender equality. This is very important. There have been networks that have since been launched in Central Asia and Afghanistan, which happened in 2021. There's a North American network, which was launched in 2023. And there are also networks in the Orange Senku Basin and in South Africa that are evolving. The newest network is the South Caucasus, which I am part of the process support team for, but we launched this in 2024. I see at least one member of the South Caucasus network here. And there are also talks about starting some local chapters in Latin America. So how does the Women in Water Diplomacy Network contribute to transforming gender norms? Well, we know that women are disproportionately affected by climate change, but they are underrepresented in water and climate negotiations, as well as formal conflict resolution processes. And at the same time, women have this knowledge and experience of water management, just as our friend shared a bit earlier. And so we know that including women in water management as well as in peace negotiations, this makes these outcomes more successful. So what the Women in Water Diplomacy Network aims to do is to break down gender norms and barriers that inhibit women's equal participation in water and climate decision-making at all levels. And how do we do that? We do it by supporting leadership activities, by supporting peer-to-peer learning and capacity building, and by supporting research and collective engagement. Women belong everywhere. Women need to be at the center of all that we do, but getting there is not always a linear process. And so by empowering women, by supporting them to move into these positions of leadership, and by bringing male allies along, again, we start to normalize women's roles, women's leadership roles, and show what's possible. And the better outcomes, environmental outcomes, peace-building outcomes speak for themselves. And so I just want to share the story of this symbol. This is the symbol of the Women in Water Diplomacy Network. And what has happened is in some negotiation contexts, women, even sitting across the table from each other, would be wearing this. And it becomes this visible symbol of the presence of the network, but the presence of women that are part of a shared collectivity, a shared community of practice, even when they're in negotiating positions with each other. So just to sum up very briefly, because I know we're short on time, in the South Caucasus, we've just started, we've had 2 successful workshops on women in water diplomacy and building negotiation skills. And of course, we're dealing with the fragility of a post-conflicts context, but we have seen how women feel that it's important for them to come together across these lines and to start advocating for each other. And so I would just like to conclude with a quote from one of the participants from our last workshop. And she said, "In a world faced with complex challenges, the strength of women's networks is transformative. By coming together, we harness collective wisdom, foster trust, and drive meaningful change. Women's networks empower us to support one another, share resources, and amplify our voices in fields that demand resilience and collaboration. Together, we are building a foundation for a future that is more inclusive, sustainable, and impactful." Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. I think it was very important to highlight that women's leadership and actually women's right to be leaders and to participate equally and meaningfully is essential in any sort of diplomacy, but it's also essential for breaking gender norms, for creating safe spaces, and for allowing it to be more inclusive. So thank you for highlighting that. Our last speaker on the panel, but nonetheless, because it's going to be very exciting with the call to action, is Menaka Gundan. She's the program director for the Asia Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women that most of us know are known as ARROW. And Menaka is going to talk about the call to action that was recently adopted at the Asia Pacific Conference last month. And Menaka, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. So we had, and I know we are short of time, so I'll dive right into the call of action. Last month, over 80 stakeholders from across Asia and Pacific, which included governments, there were 14 governments, CSOs, intergovernmental agencies, scientific and academic institutions as well, gathered in Bangkok to have a multi-stakeholder dialogue specifically on gender equality gender equality and climate action. So we have come together, and the outcome of that has been the call to action, which has 5 thematic areas. And because there's been so much said about gender equality and climate action before, and there's so many passionate stories that have been shared. And not to deviate from my script, I would, iterate from some of the points that were shared on the call to action. So one of the key areas of discussion in the call to action was accelerating the production and use of intersectional data and environment data. And one of the recommendations that we largely heard from different stakeholders and agencies were around increasing international and domestic funding to support the collection, analysis, and dissemination and the use of environment and gender statistics. So the other area that we talked about was on just an inclusive transition. And then the meaningful engagement in climate action, ensuring that there is equitable participation in just transition processes, including of diverse genders. And then identifying and addressing the structural inequalities such as harmful social norms, gender stereotypes, unequal power relations, etc., that we've already heard. The other issue was around adopting rights-based and gender-responsive approach to adaptation and planning. So a whole host of conversations around adaptation and the action to ensure co-benefits of achieving both gender equality and sustainable climate solutions. For this, a particular recommendation that we heard from all the stakeholders was around creating platforms to mobilize and facilitate knowledge sharing, skills, and capacity transfer of local indigenous women in climate action. And then also, we know we are in crisis, and we are in deep crisis at the moment when it comes to climate change. So urgently scaling up gender-responsive climate finance that is accessible and inclusive and accountable, and ensuring that gender is in the central sphere of decision-making, but also implementation as well. The last thing that we talked about was the critical interlinkages. So not just operating in compartments and silos, but having critical interlinkages in terms of climate, SRHR, GBV, etc. And, in terms of interlinkages and some key points that came out that I'd also like to iterate, but because we also heard it during the multi-stakeholder dialogue and we've heard it here as well, is particularly with the example that, we just heard from Africa, from Uganda, and we actually have representatives from those organizations here. So two examples that stood out also in terms of water crisis in Asia was examples from Nepal and from Bangladesh that was discussed, including that of the distance now communities, especially women, as their roles as water gatherers, as food gatherers, they need to walk. But also, apart from we also see the similar type of instances of gender-based violence in relation to that, but also in the intersection of SRHR. One of the things that I'd like to iterate is the number of SRHR concerns, or SRH concerns rather, that come about in women because of the load they carry and the distances they walk, especially with food and water gathering, from uterine collapse to salinized water sources causing genital infections, etc., are just some examples, and that is what we see coupled with GBV, and that's why the interlinkage that we talk about is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Menaka. I think the call to action really ties in so much of the work that we have discussed, the pathways forward. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time for the Q&A, but if you have questions, please reach out to the organizers and we'll be happy to respond. I'd like to hand the mic to Sarah to
Thank you so much, Nupur, and thank you, everyone. My heart is full because despite the ongoing negotiations and million events, you showed up here, and really we had at times a full pavilion. So really want to thank our hosts, the Benelux Pavilion, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and the EIB, who have been instrumental in making this happen and amplifying our voices. And also just reiterate, as you have seen, this level of action encompasses continents, organizations, from the highest, closest to the fire when it comes to politics and government, but all the way to the real lived realities. And it was heart-wrenching to hear. And this inspires us to continue, I think. You would agree. So on behalf of the Feminist Action Coalition for Climate Justice, UN Women, the Gender-Based Violence Action Coalition, and all of our partners who are here today, really too many to count, thank you so much for being here. Please do stay in touch. The fight continues. We will really want to take this effort forward. Also, let's not forget, this is not unique to the Climate Change Convention and COPs. We've seen what was going on in Colombia. Beautiful work on environmental human rights defenders. That work also on gender environment data carries on to this convention. Same for the land degradation and drought issues that we're going to be tackling in Riyadh in just a few days. And all of that culminating in CSW next year, where I'm hoping we'll see many of you, where we carry all of this momentum for the Beijing Plus 30 review when it comes to the environment as a critical area of action. There's so much pushback, there's so much regression, despite the evidence. We've heard from Jamie, it's crystal clear, it's glaring, it's unacceptable, it's tragic. We've heard from Uganda, and I could go on and on and on. We need to continue the fight, and we need to open the ears of policymakers, of financiers, climate funds, national budgeting, gender and climate, gender and environment budgeting. You need to put the resources. We've heard from our friend Liane Shalatek of the Heinrich Böll Stiftung, who covers this. 0.1% of finance reaches women's organizations when it comes to climate fund. This is nothing. This is certainly not enough. We've seen the protests. We need to protest in various forms. Sometimes it's more radical. Sometimes it's more, diplomatic. But the issue is there. We've really illustrated it loud and clear. So let's continue this effort together. And thank you so much for your time. And safe return home, because we might not see each other until the end of the COP. Thank you so much. Bye. And thanks, Nupur, for the brilliant moderation, and to IDLO for turning up in beautiful numbers. Thank you.